today. My name is Romain Hubert. I'm a project manager at the Institute for Climate Economics, and I will introduce our latest report on what should be done utility of scenario analysis of transition risk. And this work was carried out by I4C in the context of the Finance Climate European project. So I'm going to start with a few words on the dynamics around the scenario analysis and why we believe that further work is needed. So the TCFD has been the first initiative to invite financial and non-financial companies to carry out scenario analysis to explain the strategic implications of transition risks and opportunities. And since then, the regulators have been gradually taking up this exercise in their mandatory disclosure frameworks, for example, in France and in Europe. So in parallel of disclosure requirements, a range of approaches for scenario analysis have been developed by service providers, which is a good thing. And a lot of financial institutions have used them as a basis for their disclosure. But unfortunately, so far, the financial institutions have disclosed really patchy information on scenario analysis and on its strategic implications. So this has raised questions on the quality of the approaches of service providers that sometimes lack transparency. And overall, this has also raised questions about the progress of financial institutions on scenario analysis, but also on their capacity to identify what should be done to ensure the strategic relevance of this exercise. So in order to move forward, we worked to clarify what should be done to ensure the strategic relevance of the exercise. And as a result, we identified a range of principles that should be implemented ideally, and represent them as a checklist in our new report. So in order to introduce what should be done to ensure the strategic relevance of this exercise, I will start by explaining why scenario is actually necessary. So in the first place, as you know, we can say that the low carbon transition will create winners and losers in the real economy, and financial actors really need to anticipate how this exposes their own business to strategic risks and opportunities. But this analysis is complexified by a range of uncertainties on how the low carbon transition can actually materialize. So as you can see on the figure, there is uncertainty about the transition challenge for the overall economy. It depends, for example, on the ambition of the global warming limitation target. It's not clear either how the transition effort will be shared over time, over sectors and countries. There's also uncertainty on what will drive concretely the transition and how the consequences will propagate in the economy. And to end with, there's also uncertainty on how the economic actors are getting prepared to the range of potential transitions. So overall, this results in what we call a situation of deep uncertainty. This expression is used to refer to the difficulty to anticipate the dynamics of the low carbon transition and to identify the relevant information to be used for decision making in this context. And a key point of this is to recognize that some of this uncertainty cannot be resolved before the decisions need to be taken. So for example, there's a range of plausible transition scenarios that can be imagined, and it will never be possible to rank objectively their likelihood. So it's not easy for financial actors to address this deep uncertainty in their decisions for a range of reasons. For example, they rely a lot on probability distributions. They also rely on backward information or on scenarios that tend to replicate the past. But this is really not appropriate to describe the low carbon transition that is going to be an unprecedented and a permanent restructuration of the real economy. So even if this requires a lot of work, the exploration of the potential transition futures can be very useful for financial actors. The idea is not to predict the shape of the transition that will effectively occur, but still it can be useful in many other ways. So for example, it can help financial actors better anticipate the potential dynamics that may occur. It can help also identify not only risks, but also the opportunities. It also helps identify the key indicators to be monitored to manage effectively these risks and opportunities. And it can also provide keys to account not only for one scenario, but for a range of potential futures in strategy setting and implementation. So in this broad stories, scenario analysis is actually specifically designed to organize this strategic integration. So first, it is helpful because it structures a relatively broad exploration of potential transition dynamics, and at the same time, it delimits efficiently this exploration effort through the objective of understanding what can impact the financial actors' activities. The scenario analysis also builds the capacity of the teams to really take advantage of this exploration effort on deep uncertainty when they take decisions. So the process should include interactions with the teams to help them buy in the exercise and to reshape their process where it is necessary. So with the figure on the left, you can see more concretely how scenario analysis works. So it presents the main building blocks of a typical scenario analysis, but we should just be aware that there can be variations in practice. So the first step of the process is to organize the involvement of all relevant teams. Then in step 2, we explore broadly the potential transition dynamics, at least at sectoral level. And in step 3, we prepare for the next steps of the analysis by reducing the perimeter to essential risks and portfolios. So this is called a materiality assessment. And then we identify a subset of transition scenarios that are relevant to study the transition impacts on the selected portfolios. Then we assess the financial impact of each of the scenario on the selected portfolios. And to end with, we develop also decision criteria and metrics to help the teams take advantage of this information on financial impacts in different scenarios. So as we said, there is still a need to clarify what should be done at each step of the process that I presented. So we worked to identify some principles that should ideally be implemented to ensure a relevant exploration of deep uncertainty and also to ensure its use for the overall business strategy of the financial institution. We identified these principles based on a range of sources. Primarily, we reviewed the analytical frameworks that the service providers seek to implement. We also got inspiration from previous research on scenario analysis for non-financial companies and research on decision-making under deep uncertainty. So the resulting principles really, they reflect what we could identify based on the sources that we use, but the list may be completely completed in the future when the ecosystem makes further progress. So the principles are presented in the checklist, and it is designed to be used by financial actors to challenge their internal approach, but also to challenge their service providers. Several versions of the checklist are available. Here on the right, you can see a condensed version that is available in the report. And there is also a more detailed version that is available in a separate file that you can download through the link below. So now in the following slide, I will highlight two categories of these principles. So the first category is technical principles to ensure that the exploration of potential transition dynamics is made in a relevant way. So the first recommendation is to be very careful in the materiality assessment that prioritizes key risks and portfolios to look at, because this is really where there is a risk to lose relevance in the perimeter of analysis that you actually select for further assessment. So it really requires to dedicate a fair amount of resources to carry out this selection process. So a first condition to make a relevant selection is to start by exploring broadly the potential dynamics at sectoral level. The scenarios, transition scenarios, could be a source of inspiration, but we should keep in mind that these are simplified representations of one potential future with a specific angle, so they can miss some aspects of the broader dynamics at the sectoral level. Really key to engage resources in understanding more broadly how climate policies, technological and behavioral change could impact on diverse aspects of companies' financials in a given sector. It should be done in a way that allows to identify unexpected risks and opportunities. So for example, it should investigate complex intersectoral dynamics. It should also explore how several dynamics may combine at the same time. For example, the revenues of a company can be impacted at the same time by the cost effect of climate policies, but also by the change in product demand. And the exploration should also consider long-term horizons to understand how long-term climate dynamics and objectives may impact in the shorter term. The whole exploration can help the teams also to build their capacity to actually identify and manage the risks and opportunities. Then this exploration process should be used to ensure the quality of the materiality assessment represented here below with the figure. So broadly speaking, the identification of material risk exposures leads to look at the combination of risk drivers, of portfolio exposures and vulnerability, and their evolution over time. So as we said that the risks and opportunities can be understood at sectoral level, it's really better to classify the portfolio exposures per sector. We should also consider not only one risk driver, but also the plausible combinations of risk drivers that can apply to each sector in order not to underestimate the materiality of the risk. And impacts in the short term should also be considered. It's not only a matter of long-term impacts. So then we need to select scenarios that represent alternative stories about the key transition dynamics. And a key point in this selection process is that the objective of the scenario selection is not to reassure the teams that there is no risk. The objective is really to provide insights on the challenges and the opportunities to build a smart strategy. So in this sense, it's important to select scenarios that highlight the key impact propagation channels identified at sectoral level in the previous steps. And in addition, the scenario should include transitions that apply a high level of pressure on the overall system that is looked at in the short term too. So this includes potentially scenarios that describe a successful 1.5 or 2 degrees transition. This also includes disorderly transition scenarios that can have impacts in the short term. Then each scenario is applied to the selected portfolios to assess the financial impacts on these portfolios. Our recommendation at this stage is to take account of counterparties' characteristics. This is because they can really change the net level of financial impacts in the portfolio compared with a portfolio analysis carried out with data at sectoral level. So for example, two companies in the same sector may be exposed to different levels of transition challenges. It depends on their transition stage or also on the lock-ins in harmful activities. Their adaptive capacity to face these challenges may also vary with the company resources. For example, they can have different R&D programs in place. They can have different monitoring systems in place. The adaptive capacity can also vary a lot with the quality of the company's financial resilience strategy in front of transition risks and opportunities. So in the report, we actually give many examples to suggest that one single indicator, for example, on the company-owned patents, might not be really enough to grasp the complexity of the specific challenges and adaptive capacity of the company. So then another key aspect of scenario analysis is that it should not be seen only as a technical process to produce whatever metric for the sake of disclosure. It's also an opportunity to mention transition risks and deep uncertainty in the institution's business strategy. So a key to do so is really to involve the financial institution teams at relevant stages of the process. So with this regard, our first recommendation is that this mobilization should be planned at the beginning of the process. There should be people in charge of doing this, and these people should have a clear understanding of the scenario analysis process and its potential. Then they should start with an initial diagnosis of the team's dynamics overall on sustainability matters and on financial risks. So this can help to identify the relevant teams, their potential roles, their motivations, but also their capacity to contribute in the process. And then based on this initial diagnosis, a plan should be organized accordingly. It could include, for example, hiring relevant profiles when this sounds necessary. Then the mobilization of various teams can be useful in many aspects of the process. And in our report, we emphasize the need to engage the teams in reflecting on how they could take advantage of the exploration of deep uncertainty when they take decisions. So it's really important because the usual internal decision frameworks are not directly fit for integrating information on financial impacts in a range of alternative futures that cannot be assigned with a probability. So then the intervention of the teams is really necessary so they can decide themselves how they should reshape their own decision processes. So let's take the example of discounted cash flow valuation models. They can take account of cash flows in a range of alternative transition futures by summing up the cash flows weighted by the probability of the respective scenario. But this is not really satisfying under deep uncertainty because this methodology relies on very subjective scenario probabilities, and also it aggregates all the potential financial impacts in the different cases into one single metric. So to better integrate information on financial impacts in alternative futures, financial actors could explore other decision rationales that could be informed by alternative metrics. So for example, they could look separately at the valuation in each scenario and make decision rule based on the level of loss that they accept in each scenario instead of looking at the probability of the different scenarios. So to conclude, I may add that we also wondered how challenging it is to implement the principles of our checklist. So we made a review of available services to understand where they stand now, and we made recommendations on how to move forward. So all of this can be found in the report online. So this is the end of my presentation, and I now leave the floor to Alice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Romain.